Hope your week is off to a good start. I'm Min San-hee with our group of foreign journalists. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be back again.
Earlier in July, the government announced its plans for the so-called blind screening employment system. The system, to be adopted by all state-run entities, seeks a barrier against Korea's highly intrusive recruitment practices. We have details in this report. Starting this September, the Moon Jae-in administration will introduce the blind recruitment system at 660 public institutions nationwide. Blind recruitment refers to the hiring of people based on the performance of the job and not on the applicant's experience or personal information that may be discriminatory factors. Accordingly, the resume format will change. Under the blind recruitment system, the space where you put your picture, education or family background no longer exists. Also, during interviews, the interviewer cannot ask about the candidate's personal information, but can only ask questions related to the job.
특별한 경우에는 이력서에 학벌이나 학력이나 출신지나 신체 조건이나 차별적인 요인들은 일체 기재하지 않도록 해서 똑같은 조건에서 똑같은 출발선을 위해서 오로지 실력으로 공정하게 경쟁할 수 있도록 그렇게 당장 이번 하반기부터 시행이 됐으면 합니다.
Opinions about adopting the blind recruitment system have been generally positive. According to one survey, 4 out of 5 human resources managers in the private sector favoured blind recruitment. More than 80% of the respondents in a survey of job seekers said they would favour blind recruitment.
제도의 큰 변화라기보다는 그야말로 모든 취준생들에게 기회는 평등하게 주고 선발 과정은 공정하게 가져가자라는 이런 블라인드 채용의 기본 철학을 이해를 한다면 크게 달라질 것 같지는 않습니다.
However, private companies are reluctant to adopt the blind recruitment system. With the blind recruitment system, critics believe the employment standard may become blurred and the power of judgment may be reduced. Some job seekers also question the effectiveness of blind recruitment and argue that there may be reverse discrimination. Blind recruitment is being adopted to foster a society that is evaluated by ability. Blind recruitment has attracted a great deal of interest in the Korean job market. Let's begin with a few words on the employment protocols in your respective countries. Koichi, can you run us through a few of the formalities?
I think it's mostly same as Korea. We have some paper screening and writing exam, then interview. But one special thing is we call it recruiter system. It's young employees go to their university and scouts students. So mostly 24 to 27, 28, these young company employee speak with students. So it's an interview but more relaxed version. You can talk, chat over lunch or beer. And if you pass this screening, recruiter's screening, then you can go to a more serious interview.
I see. Elise, what about in the US?
It certainly depends on the industry, but I would say overall American culture tends to be a lot looser and informal. While you do have applications and then interviews, sometimes that could be it, just for say like a restaurant job, for example, or you could just kind of walk in and get a job in retail if you wanted to during Christmas holiday shopping season. In journalism, you're often headhunted by the time you're mid-career, so I haven't formally applied for a job in 2 or 3 different jobs, because people kind of come to you and ask you whether you would want to apply.
In Canada, it's, I think, quite a bit different than certainly South Korea. South Korea and I guess Japan have pretty regimented systems of hiring that they do each year. In Canada, it's more hiring as needed. The application is part of it. There's a lot of anti-discrimination legislation that goes into hiring to make it a little bit more transparent.
The Korean resume includes a blank space where you put a picture, and you're also required to reveal information about your height and your weight. How do you respond to this, Frank?
I think that kind of goes against the idea of a blind hiring that the government's trying to institute here, and it wouldn't pass muster in Canada. You wouldn't be allowed to do that. If you tried to do that type of thing, you'd end up in some trouble.
Right. As I revealed in the report, the new administration, therefore, is seeking to do away with this highly intrusive employment practice. How do you respond to this initiative, Elise?
I think that it's a step forward, but whether the government can kind of top-down change these processes and workplace cultures is a huge question. And we've seen that in Japan with Abenomics, because the government has been trying to help tip the balance in favor of getting more women in the workplace. And that's very difficult because of ingrained workplace culture. And that's the same thing with hiring, as we've seen in Korea, because yes, in Canada, in the United States, and a lot of the Western world, you couldn't require height, weight, a photo on resumes because these are protected classes, because you're not allowed by federal law to discriminate based on gender or based on, various other classes where age, for example, where they could come up and sue. And a photo shows those things. A photo will show your age, a photo will show your gender. And so while I think it's a great step forward that the government is doing this, what happens in a lot of workplace culture, from what I understand here in Korea, is that you end up being asked about it in the interview process, right? Like, oh, where did you go to school? Who do your parents know? What did your parents do? And a lot of these things are tied to hierarchy and legacy. And I don't know that can change, culture can change that quickly.
So it will take some time.
Right.
In addition to the anti-discrimination legislation about the picture and information on the resume, is the same type of thing in the job interview. There's a whole bunch of questions that you can't ask at the job interview. And those include like a person's religion, their political beliefs, their parents' lineage. Those types of things are really out of bounds. And in South Korea right now, anyway, they're not out of bounds.
Despite the general sense of positivity surrounding the new government initiative, there have been some critics in the corporate sector who have voiced skepticism amid concerns that such recruitment systems may actually affect the criteria of employment. What are your thoughts on this?
As long as I understand that blind screening is also focused on academic background, just only good school goes to a big company, so that is a problem in Korea. And also, we had a same problem in Japan. So I think Sony started not asking academic background to these job seekers in early 1990s. So they're doing this for almost 20 some years. And recently, one research came out, and even though they don't ask academic background, the result shows that most 60–70% of the newly employed comes from famous school, good school. So I don't know if it works or not in that sense, yeah.
I kind of disagree with the inclusion of academic background in terms of making that part blind. I think the academic background should be part of the criteria that companies use to evaluate their employees. I don't have a problem with that at all. In order to get into Seoul National University or the Sky Korea University or Yonsei University, you need a high GPA from the high school that you went to. You would have had to study hard to get that high GPA. The problem that exists in terms of a lack of meritocracy in getting into those universities is the problems in the education system itself, in the public schools in South Korea, that are not giving young people the education that they need in order to get into those or have an equal chance chance of getting into those universities. The problem is those students need to go to hagwons, they need to go to after-school classes to study, to do well enough on those exams, and it's decreased the responsibility of the public education system to meet the demands of those young people. And the problem with meritocracy getting into schools is getting into those universities is there. And I think it's fair, you know, if you correct it on that level, then recruiting from, you know, the best universities in the country, I think it's fair that it should be involved along with GPA. It's an indication of that person's, you know, discipline and initiative in working hard in their studies.
Right, and staying with what Frank just said, they are job seekers from prestigious universities with impressive grades, and they believe the system fails to look at their past achievements and may even serve to put a damper on future desire to excel, to do well. How do you respond to this, Elise?
I don't think that opening up the possibility of more competition and hiring is ever a bad thing. So long as, you know, everybody still gets a chance to apply and gets a chance to be seen, I don't think that you're necessarily overcorrecting against people who are already going to really good schools and having a good background.
Hiring practices differ depending on the company and the country. In this next report, we take a look at this diversity here in the country and elsewhere abroad.
Choosing the right employee. That's common sense in any country and in any company. But the hiring method is different. Efforts to exclude discriminatory factors and focus on the ability of job seekers to recruit talented people are ongoing in various countries. Canada, a multiracial, multi-ethnic nation, recently decided to introduce name blind in the recruitment of federal officials. According to results of one university's research earlier this year, even if a person with an Asian name has a higher education than a person with a Western name, the Asian person is less likely to be invited for an interview. The Australian Bureau of Statistics also introduced blind recruitment last year to remove the space that records personally identifiable information, such as name and gender, on the application form. As a result, the percentage of women executives has increased significantly over the past few months. As such, many countries around the world have different ways of hiring according to their culture and institutions. On the other hand, there are companies that break away from the traditional hiring process and confirm the applicant's potential in a unique method. The best example of a country that does this is Google, an internet search engine company in the US. With their unique interview questions, Google sees the creativity and thinking flexibility of job seekers. Several companies in Korea are also evaluating applicants' ability in a new way. One airline company said it would hire 20% of new crew members by asking candidates to upload their self-introduction video on the company's SNS. One food company, meanwhile, introduced the chopsticks interview to see how a candidate uses his or her chopsticks, an ability that senior Koreans associate with table manners. In addition, some convenience store chains ask for a convenience store lunch menu plan instead of a list of previous work experience. Nowadays, the importance of human resources is emphasized. To find the potential talent, companies are likely to look for more ways to hire.
Quite a number of job seekers in Korea spend much time and money sharpening their edge over the competition by signing up for various qualifications and taking diverse tests. Do you think this is necessary?
It totally depends on the industry. I mean, if you're trying to get into a chaebol and you have to pass that Samsung exam or the Hyundai exam and you spend a bunch of money on the hagwon in order to ace that test and it helps you later, that's great. But there's so many different, so many other industries, for example, like ours, in which you just have to have ingenuity and good ideas and curiosity and aggressiveness, and none of those things necessarily come out in a test, in a written test. And one of the great examples of this is Koreans do very, very well in English exams, written English exams. But if you stop a Korean on the street and you say, hey, how do I get to Gwanghwa Moon? There's the paralysis, right? There's the, you know, then it happens often. So I think that's an example of how written test skills don't necessarily translate to just the conversational skills or the improvisation that you might need in other industries.
Yeah, I don't pay any attention to that number. They always give me a TOEIC score or something on the application. I don't pay any attention to that. I go with how things are in the interview. And I think what's most important is developing a skill set that's required in the labor force and working on that skill set. You know, if you can speak 4 languages, you're good. All right, you're good. You're going to end up with a job if you carry that over into other fields. Developing a valued skill set and having a good attitude, something that Elise mentioned. You know, be ambitious, curious, and things for a reporter. I think that's the most important thing. And companies need to get away, I feel, from this strict testing and try to identify people with the skill sets that they're looking for.
In Korea, the 8 specifications of securing a good job are prestigious university, good grades, like you mentioned, a English proficiency test score, a qualification. You also need a short overseas travel, short overseas study of foreign language, a win in a competition, internship, and a volunteer service. How does this reality compare to that in America, Elise?
It seems like a lot more and a lot more specific. I do remember, though, that this whole idea of checking off different boxes, like being able to, or having some volunteer experience and doing study abroad, a lot of these things did come up when you were trying to compete to get into college, when you were in high school to get into college growing up in the United States. But what happens in college in the US is that you split off into different majors and different interest areas. And there's one big dividing line, which is there's plenty of Americans that don't go to college and end up going on to good careers. And so there's that as well. But you end up sort of winding up weeded out into different sorts of fields, and that more diffuse way that happens during university then ends up allowing you to develop skill sets specific to the industry that you're trying to get into.
Right. Is it similar in Japan, Koichi?
Yes. Well, I don't know if this is a good example or not, but maybe until some years ago, if you go to good college and if you are a member of the college sport team, then you can go to whatever company you want to go, because these 2 points was regarded as a proof of, how you can say, one is intelligence and one is ability to work hard and work long. So, so it was more simple than Korean situation.
I see. What about in Canada?
Well, I'm not sure about in Canada, but my experience with so-called spec, as it's called here, as an employer, it can be kind of annoying. Because for the companies that are going to hire a person for that career job, sure, that spec can be important, you know, perhaps a criteria that they look for. But if you're one of the companies that's hiring somebody for, let's say, an internship or a lower level position, hiring somebody that's just after that spec can be a little bit of a problem, because the person really isn't interested in that particular job. They just want to check that box on their resume. And so their commitment to employment with you and their attitude might not be as good as it could be.
Koichi, this next question is for you. Tell us a bit about the employment prospects for the youth in Japan. It's quite favorable compared to Korea.
Yeah, according to one think tank, last year, almost 50% of newly graduate students get job offer from more than 2 companies. So it is, the problem is more for company side. You know, they can't hire enough newly graduates from this market. So yeah, so that's what's going on. And another interest trend is more young students prefer to go to small and medium-sized company rather than big company. One of the reasons is maybe small and medium-sized company recently gives sometimes more salary than larger company.
Elise, what are some hiring practices in America that Korea could learn from?
One thing that we're doing at my company in order to have a bigger pool and to stop, some of these baked-in processes that might not be helpful, for example, like cover letters, is we're trying to hire by ideas and less by resume. That is, when you come to the table, what ideas do you have? What ideas do you bring that would help the organization, help the team? And this sort of weeds out your background. It doesn't matter whether you went to journalism school. It doesn't matter if you have 3 to 5 years of experience and all these things. And so, we're trying some things like that will hopefully allow for a larger talent pool. Because one thing that research has shown is that women are less likely to apply for jobs unless they meet every single qualification, whereas men are like, well, I only meet 3 to 4, but I'm gonna go ahead and apply anyway because of just a difference in confidence going into these job application processes. So what we want to do is get more women, we want more minorities, people of color, and in order to do that, we have to have less qualifications required on the spec sheet, if you will.
As we saw in the report, there are quite diverse ways of hiring new workers. Frank, have you heard of any hiring methods that you think were unique or interesting?
Well, I thought one of the sort of more unique ones that they were getting into in Korea before the idea of blind hiring, which I really like. I like this, the idea of blind hiring. I think it's kind of overdue here in South Korea. It reminds me of an orchestra auditioning new members to the orchestra. A really good orchestra will have a barrier between the musician and the jury listening to that musician to decide whether they will become part of the orchestra. So they can't even see who it is. All they can do is hear the sound and choose the best applicant based on that sound. If only we could do the same thing in the employment market, it would be great.
In Korea, we have what is known as the hiring season. It's a particular time in the year where many companies open up new posts for new workers. Is it the same in your countries? I understand
Japan.
It is in Japan, right?
Japan, yes.
We have the
in
same.
The US, no, it's just rolling. It tends
Right,
to be
so it's
rolling.
recruitment based on necessity. When the need arises, you hire. I see. Well, if a company was seeking to hire a good worker, what should the company focus on? Frank, I know it's a general question, but in your opinion?
Again, I think they need to look at attitude and they also need to look at skill set and their own particular needs. Every applicant is going to be different. I use applications and my previous sort of understanding and sort of favor for using the actual paper application is to look at it, to qualify a few people for the interview, and then take those applications and throw them in the garbage, and then go with the interview. And all those people, the playing field is leveled at that point, and then going with the interview, and not so much using what was on the paper and trying to determine whether that person's a good fit for your company based on that.
And if we were going just with the interview, Elise, what kind of questions do you suppose would ensure the selection of a great worker?
I'm interested in story ideas, of course, when I'm hiring news assistants, because it gives me a sense of their creativity, how knowledgeable they are about news events, and kind of how nuanced they are and how they think about things. I'm really more interested, when I ask questions in interviews, I'm really more interested in getting at how somebody thinks, and rather than the specifics of the answer. Like, how do they arrive at the answer? What was the sort of process that they took to get there? That's interesting to me. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that interviews often favor extroverts, right? Like people like me who talk a lot and are loud. But there's plenty of jobs like computer programming in which extroverts might not necessarily be a better computer programmer or a better mechanical engineer or a bridge builder. So for those jobs, I would favor something that a lot of the tech companies are doing now in the United States, which are tryouts, where you actually try out working with the team virtually, programming a project or software, and you get paid for that time, maybe just minimum wage or something. But that tryout helps give you a sense without having to perform like our jobs in journalism, where performance matters.
Right. Well, today we talked about the new administration's blind recruitment system. And before we go, Koichi, what are your thoughts on today's discussion?
Interesting, I look back my time of, job seeking like 20 some years ago.
Was it a long search, or were you fortunate to find a job straight away?
First time I was not good at it, so I couldn't pass that big newspaper and went to a local newspaper. And after working for 2 years, then job interview becomes very easy because I have experience, right? So that's how I end up here.
I see, right, and we're fortunate to have you here. Frank, you're going to like my closing remarks. Herbert Kelleher, the co-founder of Southwest Airlines, once said, "We don't care that much about education and experience because we can train the people to do what they have to do. We hire attitudes." And with that, for some food for thought that is, we end this program. We'll see you again next week. Thank you for watching.